Welcome back, everybody, to the NCAA Next Up Dynasty here on NCAA Football 14. One of the most fun times during college football season is all the bowl games, and that's what we'll be covering today. In the last episode, we revealed all the big-time awards, including the Heisman Trophy and the College Football Playoff. In case you missed that episode, I'll leave a card at the top right so you can check it out. Okay, hopefully you clicked the card within a couple of seconds. If you did not miss the last episode, then you know that this is what the 12-team playoff looks like. You guys voted on the teams playing in the playoff, and we will be kicking off the college football playoff in the next episode, not today. In today's episode, we're going through all of the other bowl games. So still a lot of big games today, but next episode is where we're going to start the playoff. Here's a look at all of the bowls we've got. Keep in mind with NCAA 14, there's only 2 teams who make the national championship, so all the other playoff teams have regular bowl games. So because of that, you have teams like Texas A&M and Kentucky, for example, along with Georgia and Florida State, who are playing against teams in their bowl games who made the college football playoff. So what I'm going to do is those 4 teams will end up playing each other instead, and we'll cover those games at the end of the episode. I hope that doesn't sound too confusing, but it'll make a little bit more sense when we get to it. All right, let's not waste any time. Let's get this show on the road as we kick off with the Gildan, New Mexico Bowl between the Idaho Vandals and the Florida Atlantic Owls. Most of the early bowl games are against some of the better Group 5 teams, and these 2 schools are both pretty solid. It was a pretty competitive game early on, but as the second half rolled through, Florida Atlantic really took control. The Owls played different quarterbacks in the first and second half, trying to figure some things out for next season, and ultimately both quarterbacks ended up playing really well, so the Owls might have a tough decision on what they're going to do in terms of their starting QB next season. Florida Atlantic is one of the better teams in the Conference USA, and they do have some expectations to win. As for Idaho, they also finished 7-6. Overall, a pretty successful first season in the Mountain West. In terms of NFL draft prospects in this game, the most notable is Idaho defensive end George Charbonnet II, who had a pretty quiet game with only 2 tackles, his stock not going up in the loss. We had the famous Idaho Potato Bowl in Boise between the Ohio Bobcats and the Nevada Wolfpack. The star of the show on the blue turf was Ohio running back Otis Washington Jr., who caught 2 touchdowns and he ran for 2 more, leading Ohio to the win 42-28. It still feels like a slightly disappointing season for Ohio because these guys did win the MAC last year and they got a little bit worse, but overall, good win, solid season for Ohio. Despite finishing under 500, Nevada does have some interesting prospects. Quarterback Rocky Olson and wide receiver Ibrahim Dianko are both fringe draftable players in this year's draft, and they were both solid, particularly Dianko. But again, Otis Washington, the star of the show, he's going to be a senior next year and likely one of the top returning offensive players in the MAC conference. Justice Schooner at corner for Ohio, he's a draft prospect and he played great, nabbing 2 interceptions in the win for Ohio. Next up, we had the Poinsettia Bowl between SMU, who we saw lose in the American Athletic Championship, facing off against the Wyoming Cowboys. Wyoming has an intriguing quarterback, Aziz Nozuari, who is currently projected as a priority undrafted free agent. He actually had a pretty bad game in this one, although he did have some solid throws, including that one. But SMU's offense was a little bit too much. Freshman quarterback Uman Volpe had a pretty solid game with some good throws, such as that one to running back Prince Garrett, as SMU wins 26-21. Aziz Nozuari only goes 10 for 24. His stock not going up here in the loss. He ran it decently, I guess. And then on the other side, Uman Volpe made a lot of big-time throws, but he missed a lot of throws as well. On defense for SMU, linebacker Osman Chetwood, he's a draft prospect. 8 tackles, 4 for a loss, and 2 sacks. Very, very good performance from him. Western Michigan facing off against Old Dominion here in the Beef O'Brady's Bowl. This is what bowl season's all about right here. Teams like Western Michigan and Old Dominion facing off against each other. And ultimately, it was the Old Dominion Monarchs who were able to get the win here. Sophomore quarterback Vance Maximus really threw the ball well. Maximus is one of the most intriguing Group 5 quarterbacks in the country. Somebody who could be an NFL draft prospect in a few years if he keeps his development up as Old Dominion wins 34-31. Maximus with 396 passing yards and 4 touchdowns. He completely balled out in this one. Doucette with 161 receiving yards. On the other side, Wolf Eatonson, the senior running back, had a good game, 113 yards and 2 touchdowns despite the loss. Temple and Southern Miss facing off here in the New Orleans Carriers Bowl here in the Mercedes-Benz Superdome, home of the New Orleans Saints. Temple's had an up-and-down season. They've beaten some really good teams this year, including Kentucky, but they were unable to handle quarterback Maker Bayfield and the Southern Miss offense. The Golden Eagles finished the season with double-digit wins as they would take this game over Temple pretty easily. They had certainly some home field advantage, only one state over, whereas Temple had to fly in from Philadelphia. But the Golden Eagles would win it 42-32. Gotta give a hand to Temple for competing because on paper they're quite a bit worse than these guys, but unable to get the win despite a pretty good performance from junior quarterback Miles Ekiyor. He did throw 2 costly interceptions, but other than that, he had a pretty busy day, scoring 4 times in the loss for the Owls. Navy and Utah State are up next here in the Las Vegas Bowl. It has been a very up-and-down season for Navy. They've won some big games. They beat teams like Middle Tennessee State and Notre Dame, who are both in the college football playoff. But they lost their final 2 games of the year, killing any chance they had of getting into the playoffs, so they decided to take their aggression out on Utah State. The midshipmen ran it really well with running back Torian Wilson and freshman quarterback Chuck Burton as they would win it 27-10, finishing the season ranked 25 in the AP Top 25. Both quarterbacks threw the ball horribly. Their combined passer ratings, I'm pretty sure, were less than 100. That's bad. FIU heads to Hawaii for the Hawaii Bowl against Hawaii. Although Hawaii is the heavy favorite, being that they're home and they're a lot better than FIU, the Golden Panthers ended up making this a pretty good game. For Hawaii, quarterback Malosi Savea threw the ball very well, connecting in the end zone 3 times, but FIU's offense was up for the task. Quarterback Jimmy Jenkins had a pretty nice game for the Golden Panthers, connecting on a couple of scores. This one ended up being a very close matchup, but ultimately a late touchdown from FIU would propel them to the surprising upset over Hawaii in the Hawaii Bowl, 44-38 in overtime. Great end of the season for FIU, shocking the Rainbow Warriors. Malosi Savea was really good, though. 290 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. Desi Joseph, the senior running back in his final game with 106 yards. I'm pretty sure he now finishes his career with 4 1,000-yard seasons. Keanu Osatoa with a good game for Hawaii, 9 catches, 100 yards, and a score. But it was not enough to defeat FIU. Jimmy Jenkins throwing 4 touchdowns in this one. Wide receiver Albert Tate caught 12 passes for 213 yards and 3 touchdowns. This guy isn't a nobody. He had like 1,700 receiving yards or something this year. Marshall heads to the Little Caesars Pizza Bowl in Detroit against the Buffalo Bulls, who we saw just lose in the MAC championship game in this very building. What's better than losing 1 game in Ford Field? Losing 2 in a row. Sounds a lot like the Detroit Lions over the last 60 years, although things are changing for Detroit, and I guess they handed their curse over to the University of Buffalo, who loses 23-17 against the Thundering Herd. Alan Arnold was okay. Jerron Bellamy was really good, however. And then on the other side, Marshall had 3 different quarterbacks play. Good Lord. And they were still able to win. Buffalo's got a lot of intriguing draft prospects on the defensive side of the ball. None of these guys are seniors, but in the future, Darrell DeLoach, Slim Saxon, and of course, Francis Bolakumoa, who's probably going to be a first-round pick in a year from now. Akron faces off against Army here in the Military Bowl. Just like we saw with Hawaii, they kind of had their own bowl game, and so does Army. So wouldn't it be funny if Akron spoiled the party? Well, that's what they ended up doing. Despite their starting quarterback Chris Morales getting hurt in the first quarter of this game, Army's backup Richie Gatewood came in and played really well, leading Akron to the upset over the Army Black Knights, stealing the fun away from Army 31-24. Akron finishes the year 8-5, while Army goes down to 7-6. Jermaine Carter was pretty terrible in this game for Army. A fun story with him being the backup and playing all year, but he was pretty bad in this game. Greenwood, 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. The real star of the show was tight end Gunnar Wilson for Akron, 69 yards, nice, and 3 touchdowns. Gunnar Wilson is not some nobody. He was a very high recruit, went to Penn State, transferred to Akron. I don't really know why he chose Akron, because he could start at 90% of Power 5 schools, but he's going to be a high NFL draft pick in a couple years. Number 23, West Virginia, facing off against Washington State here in the Holiday Bowl. Both teams a little disappointed with their seasons. West Virginia had big expectations and did not match those, whereas Washington State for a while had a chance to make the college football playoff before losing to Washington right at the end of the year, killing those chances. Despite that, this ended up being a really good game. Both of these quarterbacks have a lot to prove. Jose Alvaro for West Virginia and Jamison Tyson for Washington State. Both seniors, both draft prospects, both looking to up their stocks. And it was a really good game. Both QBs played very well, but ultimately a late touchdown from running back Tucker McKenzie would lead West Virginia to the overtime win, 42-35 against Washington State, with both teams finishing 8-5. Jamison Tyson played very well, throwing for 5 touchdowns despite the loss. He's probably going to be a late day 3 flyer. As for Jose Alvaro, he was a little bit disappointing this year, but he had a pretty good game to finish off the year. I think he's probably going to be a fringe top 100 pick, probably somebody who goes in the 3rd or 4th round. Miami facing off against BYU here in the Belk Bowl at the Bank of America Stadium, home of the Carolina Panthers. This Miami team really intrigues me because they've been pretty disappointing 2 years in a row, but they're a very young group. Miami's going to have a very large core of their team back next year, and I think they could be really good, and they showed some of those flashes today. Quarterback Scooter Young Jr. had some great throws, including a couple of touchdowns to E.J. Twyman. If both Scooter and Twyman return to school, which I expect they will, Miami could be a dangerous team in the ACC next season as they win this game 40-27. Johnny Walker, the BYU quarterback, got a little bit banged up. The backup, Philip Stryker, who's going to be the starter next year, ended up doing really well. But Scooter Young Jr. was the star of the show with 4 touchdowns. I think him, along with E.J. Twyman and running back Darius Edwards II, they could all be real breakout candidates. Tulane facing off against Boston College here in the AdvoCare V100 Bowl. Pretty interesting game here. Boston College would end up getting the win, led by the loose lefty, Garland Nobles, who had a nice touchdown pass here to tight end John Turk, who has a chance to be a 2nd or 3rd round pick in this year's draft. And then a late touchdown on the ground by Garland Nobles would propel Boston College to win 42-24. Garland Nobles completed 8 passes for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. I don't think I've ever seen a player with a 40% completion percentage have a passer rating of 215. That's honestly impressive to do. As for Tulane, quarterback Sean Mechie was pretty solid, even though his passer rating was 85 points lower than Garland Nobles. Ball State facing off against Syracuse here in the Russell Athletic Bowl. Syracuse was a really solid team for most of the year in the ACC. Lost against some really good teams late, but they were able to make their presence felt here. Syracuse is led by senior quarterback Romano Fargnoli, another guy looking to up his draft stock, as currently a day 3 projected pick right now, and he played really well in this game, leading Syracuse to the win 34-17. Fargnoli threw for 4 touchdowns in this matchup. Afe Workchike, the running back, he's a draft prospect. He played pretty well. On the other side, Vince Clark, not so much, throwing 3 interceptions. And in terms of draft prospects on the defensive side of the ball, Ball State safety Athanase Gothero is being looked at as a 1st-round pick. He was pretty quiet, but he still had a phenomenal season, finishing in 3rd place for the Jim Thorpe Award. Penn State facing off against Kansas State in the Meineke Car Care Bowl. Penn State was being considered for the college football playoff, missed the cut. You'd think they'd feel a little bit disrespected with their draw being a 6-6 Kansas State team, but the Wildcats gave a good fight. Ultimately, Penn State's high-octane offense was a little bit too much for Kansas State to stop, and Penn State would get the win, finishing the year with double-digit wins at 10-3. Still a really successful season for the Nittany Lions after they missed out on a bowl game last year. They were a lot better this year in the playoff push for really the entire season. Their defense was not great today, though. Bartholomew Buckley really threw the ball well for Kansas State. Wide receiver Trey Richardson II had a big performance as well for the Wildcats, scoring twice. And then on the other side, Lyndon Kirkstead, another inefficient game from him. He was so good early in the year, really fizzled out as the year went along. Aaron Robinson with a solid game on the ground. And then Penn State's top receivers were kind of quiet. Chad Johnson and Shai Jones-Porter with barely 50 combined receiving yards. North Texas facing off against San Diego State here in the Armed Forces Bowl at Amon G. Carter Stadium, home of the TCU Horned Frogs, who, of course, are currently preparing for the college football playoff as the number 3 overall seed. San Diego State quarterback Michael McDonald was really impressive in this game, navigating the pocket, making big-time throws under pressure. He is currently being looked at as an undrafted prospect, but with his performance today, maybe he can find himself slipping into the 6th or 7th round. San Diego State wins big, 40-16. McDonald with 353 yards and 4 touchdowns, completely balling out. As for North Texas, they kind of got clobbered in this game, I'm not going to lie, finishing the year at 6-7. San Diego State linebacker Asher Gonzalez won many awards, is really the best defensive player in college football, although he was pretty quiet in this game, but still is expected to be a first-round pick. One of the most disappointing teams in this series so far has been the LSU Tigers, who failed to make a bowl game last year. This year, they only went 6-6, and their draw is the Fight Hunger Bowl against the 6-6 East Carolina Pirates, who are coming off a huge win at the end of the season against Navy. You think LSU should handle these guys. They're clearly better on paper, but this ended up being a very close game, and ultimately ECU was able to get the upset win 23-20 against the Tigers. Despite that, I wouldn't be too upset if I was an LSU fan, because sophomore quarterback Thomas Torominko, who has had his ups and downs over his first 2 years as a starter, was pretty good in this game. And albeit East Carolina's defense is not very good, but baby steps, that's what it's all about. Quarterback Cliff Leonard was really not all that good for ECU despite the win. Oklahoma State facing off against Washington in the Alamo Bowl. Washington's got to feel really disappointed. I mean, these guys were up 18 points in the Pac-12 championship game. All they had to do was not blow it, and they would get into the college football playoff. Obviously, they blew it. So going into this game, I wasn't really sure how they would respond, and they gave a good fight. But Oklahoma State's offense was a little bit too much to handle. Junior quarterback Jorgensen Juper had a really good game with some nice throws, including that one to tight end B.J. Haas in the end zone, and a late rushing touchdown from Goose McClaro would ultimately be the dagger for Oklahoma State. Overall, one of the more exciting games of the bowl season. Washington finishes 10-4. Keontae Jordan and Anthony Kendrickson were both very solid in their final collegiate games, as both of them are expected to be NFL draft picks, Kendrickson in particular, with 222 receiving yards. On the other side, Jorgensen Jupiter was very, very solid. Oklahoma State really improved from last season, and with most of their core coming back, I think they could be even better next season. Number 24, Baylor, facing off against number 21, Indiana, in the Buffalo Wild Wings Bowl. Now we're really starting to get to some of the good games with some of the better teams across the country. This ended up being a very good game. However, Baylor's powerful rushing attack was too much for Indiana's light defense to handle. Freshman Dontavius Brown finishes with over 2,000 rushing yards on the season, and a late rushing touchdown from the third stringer right there would be enough for the win, 38-31. Both passing games were inefficient, but solid. And of course, for Baylor, it was all about the ground game. Dontavius Brown's really going to be a name to keep an eye on for major awards in the future. Again, rushing for 2,000 yards as a freshman. Number 14, Mississippi State, facing off against North Carolina in the Music City Bowl. These are very similar teams. Both have very explosive passing attacks with two very talented quarterbacks who both have great deep balls. We saw that in today's game. Graham Fisher for UNC with some really good throws, including that one to Shamir Kason for a touchdown. But the North Carolina defense could not stop DeAndre Smith at all. Smith finishes with 49 passing touchdowns on the season to just 4 interceptions. This late touchdown by possible first-round wide receiver Romeo Gardner would be the dagger as Mississippi State wins 49-35. Coach Mike Leach would be proud of this passing attack from Mississippi State. R.I.P. Coach Leach. Graham Fisher, 381 yards and 3 touchdowns. He's going to be a real breakout candidate next year as a senior with him being fully healthy, really for the first time in his collegiate career. On the other side, what a season for DeAndre Smith, really looking like a possible first-round pick in this upcoming draft with how well he has played throughout the season, finishing, I believe, in 5th place for the Heisman Trophy. Next up, we have the Sun Bowl between Arizona and Rutgers here at the University of Texas, El Paso. So Rutgers is an interesting team. They went 9-3. They were in the college football playoff vote. They ended up getting last place of the eligible teams, but they've still got some talent, particularly number 7 out of the backfield, Dr. Antoine. The problem is, as good as Antoine has played all year, today being no exception, the rest of Rutgers' team is pretty bad. Their defense is bottom 10 in scoring across the country, and they got lit up today by Kareem Kamara. Arizona wins big, 45-16. Rutgers finishes with a negative point differential in the season, despite being considered for the college football playoff. With Dr. Antoine's collegiate career done and him likely being a first-round pick, where does Rutgers go from here with their star player who's been the face of this program over the last 4 years going to the NFL? On the other side, Kareem Kamara played really well. If he returns as a senior, I think Arizona is going to open up the year as the favorites in the Pac-12 because Kamara is one of the most talented QBs in the country. A wise man once said, "If it ain't snowing, I ain't going." We've got snow here at the Liberty Bowl between number 18 Auburn and the 10-2 Tulsa Golden Hurricane. In my opinion, one of the most intriguing matchups of the bowl season, and this game did not disappoint. Tulsa was up 24-21 early in the fourth quarter, and that's where the offensive outburst began. Sidney McDonald, the Auburn quarterback, was phenomenal in his final collegiate game, but Tulsa's offense stood stride for stride. E.J. O'Connor of Tulsa made some really, really good throws, again with Tulsa back up by 3. Auburn would respond with a late touchdown from McDonald to Akari June. Tulsa gets the ball back. What do? Drive down the field with a beautiful touchdown pass from O'Connor over to Francois as Tulsa beats Auburn 35-38. What a year for Tulsa. They go 11-2. They finish the year beating a really talented SEC team and finish the season ranked in the top 25. A great year for the Golden Hurricane. Sidney McDonald very quietly had a great season. We haven't really talked about him that much because Auburn's been kind of mid, but Sidney McDonald was phenomenal this year. Texas and Duke are up next here in the Chick-fil-A Bowl. I don't know how Texas got this game. They went 6-6, and this ended up being a really weird game when it's all said and done. So as we look at this Texas team, they're led by freshman quarterback Onyx St. James, who had a fine season, freshman All-American. So Onyx was struggling early in this game, and they benched him for true freshman Corey Wheatons, who ended up dominating in this game with a beautiful throw here for Tyrese Barricon for a touchdown. Could there be a quarterback battle brewing in Austin, Texas? Well, if there is, they're going to have to ponder over it with a loss. Heisman finalist Justin Tucker had a great game for the Duke Blue Devils, leading them to a win 41-35. A phenomenal end to a great junior season for Justin Tucker. If he returns to school next year, he will definitely be the preseason Heisman favorite as Duke finishes the year 10-3. Great season from the Blue Devils. Can't say the same about Texas. It'll be interesting to see if they have a quarterback battle in the offseason, but regardless, it'll be without their top 2 receivers, Tyrese Barricon and Deaden Washington, who both will be entering the NFL. One of the more lopsided matchups on paper, we've got 6-6 Georgia State against number 13 USC in the heart of Dallas Bowl. USC has to feel disrespected with their draw being Georgia State, and boy did the Trojans take that personally. USC dominated in this game, winning 42-7. They felt completely disrespected by playing against a crappy Sun Belt team, and they let that be known. Overall, USC with another great season. They finished 9-4. The game was so bad, there's no game summary on the bottom. I found that kind of funny. But yeah, this was a complete blowout. I don't know why these teams played against each other. Scotty Kimbrell threw for 5 touchdowns. Hot Rod Pryor with 9 catches for 130-some yards and 2 touchdowns. All the receivers played well. The defense played really well. I mean, these are 2 completely different teams and 2 completely different stratospheres. Again, I don't know why they played each other. Alabama and Missouri here in the Cotton Bowl. Disappointing ends to both of these team seasons. Missouri losing in the Big 12 championship to TCU, whereas Alabama lost 4 of their last 5. Alabama's a run-first team. We know that. However, they did have to deal with injury at the quarterback position. Senior Bryson Byrne missed most of the year with an injury. He is healthy now, and he wanted to play. He wanted to show draft prospects what he is capable of, and he ended up playing really well. Now, the box score numbers aren't going to wow you, but Bryson Byrne threw it with anticipation, with poise in the pocket. He ran it well as Alabama wins 31-24. Latavius Marrington, who had a great season this year, finished horribly in his final game with Missouri before entering the NFL. He'll probably be a early day 3 pick, as will Bryson Byrne, who I think has the physical skills to be really good. Interestingly enough, he led the team in passing touchdowns, even though he only played 3 games. That's how bad Troy Davenport was. So I'm really curious to see where Bryson Byrne ends up getting drafted, because I think he's a good player who's just been completely misused on Alabama over the last few years. Kyle McCloskey with a great end to his college career with 140 yards and a touchdown. And shout out to the defense with interceptions by Guerrero and Aguga. UConn facing off against Pitt in the BBVA Compass Bowl here at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. Pitt has been pretty disappointing 2 years in a row. This year they only went 6-6, barely getting into a bowl game against a tough UConn team. And the Huskies were definitely the better team in this game. Chris Butler, the NCAA's leading rusher, had another very solid performance for UConn. Freshman quarterback Clifford Johansson made some solid throws in this one, leading the Huskies to the victory over Pitt, who finishes the year under 500. 28-21 your final. Both teams had multiple quarterbacks play in this game, whether for injury or for whatever reason. They both decided to do so. Interestingly, for UConn, their star running back, Chris Butler, was not the leading ball carrier. It was actually Cleveland. I'm not really sure why. Butler's been the rock of their program the last few years, and this was his final game. The MAC champion Central Michigan Chippewas are up next. They're having the GoDaddy.com Bowl against the University of Louisiana Monroe. Central Michigan actually almost made the college football playoff. They ended up getting 14th place in the vote, barely missing out, which kind of surprised me because I don't think they're the 14th best team in the country. They looked the part on offense, scoring 42 points. Their defense, not so much. Now, Central Michigan still won this game, but only by 3 points, 42-39 your final. Senior quarterback Jason Perez did have a great game, including this awesome touchdown throw to tight end Tyler Harris, the John Mackey Award winner. I think it's fair to say, though, Central Michigan doesn't really belong in the college football playoff, and they didn't really have much business getting more votes than teams like Kentucky, Penn State, and Florida State. And all of those teams got less votes than Central Michigan, for Lord knows what reason. But overall, a great season for the Chippewas as they finished 12-2. In terms of draft prospects, DeAndre Clark from the Louisiana Monroe, defensive end. He had 2 TFLs and a sack. All right, now we get to the last 2 bowl games where I had to switch some things up on different save files. So first we had the Outback Bowl with Georgia and Texas A&M. Keep in mind these rankings are not accurate because Lord knows Texas A&M is not the 4th ranked team in the country. They're not even the 4th best team in the SEC West. And their defense, which has been a problem all year, was a problem again. They could not stop quarterback Aram Kachiken, who had a career game throwing for 6 touchdowns, 2 of which were caught by senior running back Patalomayo Moluwalu, last year's college football playoff MVP, as Georgia wins 49-35. Again, don't mind the rankings, don't mind the records. Those are wrong, but the rosters and whatnot are the same. It's been a up and down season for quarterback Luca Franco, but he ended up playing really well today, and I think he could break out as a senior if he continues to work at it in the offseason. Senior running back Kason McDaniels opted out of this game to prepare for the NFL draft. He's currently being looked at as a second-round draft pick. But he doesn't play defense, and Texas A&M needed defense today. They needed defense all year, to be quite frank, and they could not stop Aram Kachiken, who's been kind of disappointing this year, but he threw 6 touchdowns in this game, by far the best performance of his career. Running back Patalomayo Moluwalu scored 3 times, capping off a very successful collegiate career. The final game of the day, we've got Florida State and Kentucky in the Capital One Bowl. Both of these teams coming off of disappointing losses, knocking them out of playoff contention. Florida State was like the 5th or 6th team out, which I thought was really disrespectful. I don't think you guys realize how good this Florida State team is, and while their offense understood the memo, Brody Kluby had a great final collegiate game for the Seminoles, but their defense was pretty bad today. Quarterback Isaiah Gordon also had a great final collegiate game, along with wide receiver Cassius Morris, as Kentucky wins 41-34. Again, don't mind the rankings and the records on the left. Those are incorrect. Jacob King was pretty quiet, but it was good to see Brody Kluby play well. He's being looked at probably as a first-round draft pick in this year's draft, as is Kentucky quarterback Isaiah Gordon, who has taken a step back after a really good first half of the season, but I think Gordon still played well enough to warrant being a first-round draft pick. Freshman running back Fadiala Cisse did not play. He had a back injury from carrying the entire team in the SEC championship game, which Kentucky still lost. He was the only guy who showed up. Ironic that he doesn't play here and they win. So maybe I'm overrating Florida State. I don't know. So that'll wrap up the episode. All of the bowl games are in the books, and now it's down to the college football playoff. One of these 12 teams will win the national championship. Obviously, we're not going to fit all 11 games into one episode. I don't think it would do all of those games justice. So I think I'm going to split it up into 2 or 3 episodes, probably 3. I think that's going to be the best way to do it. So I think in the next episode, we're going to go through the first round, going through those first 4 matchups, and they're going to be really fun games. So we're going to watch all of those very closely. I might even premiere the video too. Let me know if you want to see that. So yeah, that'll wrap it up. Hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out.